All right. Thanks very much for having me. I actually just came from CCast, which is they make cast titanium and Inconel parts for the SpaceX rocket engines, and I actually brought all my 5 kids who are sitting right there. So they got to see steel being poured, and then titanium being poured as well, and creating sophisticated castings. They seemed pretty excited about that, and it was kind of like Charlie and the Metal Factory, I guess. So let's see. I guess I'll maybe talk a bit about entrepreneurship and technology. Tell you about my experiences and what happened to me, and then I think we're going to try to reserve as much time as possible for Q&A from the audience, and certainly feel free to ask any and every question. And so I'll kind of give the nutshell account because it's getting a little bit long at this point. So I arrived in North America when I was about 17. I was born in South Africa. But I was actually named after my American great-grandfather. So I was returning to my ancestral homeland, actually. He was John Elon Haldeman, and he was actually from Minnesota, and generally from the Minnesota-Wisconsin area. Anyway, but I wanted to come to the United States because I think it's where great things are possible. It's where the technological frontiers are pushed forward. And I knew I wanted to be involved in that. I didn't know exactly how. But anyway, I went through college and ended up eventually at Stanford with the idea of studying applied physics and material science, try to figure out ways to store energy more effectively for electric cars so you can make them go further. And I ended up putting that on hold to start an internet company in '95, and at the time it wasn't from the perspective of making a lot of money, because nobody had made any money on the internet in '95. But it seemed to me that the internet was something that would create effectively like a nervous system for humanity. So whereas previously, if you wanted to access information, you'd have to go to a library, if you went to a lot of libraries, you still wouldn't have access to all that much information. But if everything got connected, then anyone, anywhere, if you were in sort of a jungle in middle of the Amazon jungle in South America or something, and you had an internet connection, you'd have access to all the world's information. In fact, you'd have access to more information than the US president did in, let's say, 1980. So it'd be pretty incredible and transformative. So I thought, well, I wanted to be part of helping make that happen, and so I decided to put my studies at Stanford on hold and start an internet company, initially to help the media companies get online, so we had as investors and customers the New York Times Company, Hearst, Knight Ridder, and so forth, and that ended up working out. So we sold that company and then created PayPal. And the idea behind PayPal was simply to facilitate payments on the internet. Because at the time, if you bought something from someone, you'd have to mail them a check, and it would take weeks to conduct the transfer. And we figured out how to make it really fast and easy to transfer funds from one person to another. And that actually grew super fast. It grew virally. And the key to that was figuring out how to make the friction of signing up for an account very, very low, and make it easy for one person to refer another. And so as our customer base grew, the actual rate of growth grew. This resulted in some initial challenges in scaling, because we started off with 5 people in customer service. And after 2 months, we had 100,000 customers. So our phone lines exploded, basically. But we were able to overcome those issues. and then eBay bought the company in 2002, and it's sort of grown from there. So what that did, though, was gave me the capital to try to do some things that are fairly high capital. And there were two things. There are two areas that I really wanted to get into. One was sustainable energy, production and consumption of energy in a sustainable manner, and the other was space exploration. And I started off initially with the idea of doing something in the space exploration arena. In fact, it wasn't actually with the idea of creating a company. It was initially with the thought of spurring interest in sending people to Mars. So I put together this idea called Mars Oasis, which was to send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars and get people excited about the idea of going there, and thus increase NASA's budget in order to make it happen. As I got more and more into that, I discovered that the real issue was that the cost of space transportation was really high. In fact, and it was getting worse. So we're used to technology getting better every year, but in some arenas it actually does not. It gets worse. Particularly when you consider that in 1969 we were able to go to the moon, and then we were unable to go beyond low Earth orbit. And now with the space shuttle retired, we're not even able to go to Earth orbit at all, even with people. So that's, that was not the right trajectory. So I actually went to Russia 3 times to look at buying an ICBM to launch this mission, which is very crazy.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so after my 3rd trip of trying to negotiate with the Russians to buy an ICBM, and I did actually get a deal, so figured out what it would cost and everything. But I concluded that my initial assumption had been wrong, that it was not a question of trying to generate more will to explore, because I think the United States in particular is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. Space exploration is fundamental to the American psyche. So, but people really need to believe that it can be done, and it's not going to break the bank if it does. So that's when I decided to start a rocket company. And I actually didn't think it would succeed, and it almost didn't. So we started off developing a small rocket, which was kind of a scale model version. It was about 100,000 pounds of thrust, so big, big by normal standards, but small for a rocket. And developed the engine and the airframe and the electronics and the guidance and control system, and then proceeded to have 3 failed launches in a row. And so for various technical reasons, the first 3 launches did not succeed in reaching orbit. Launches 2 and 3 did get to space, but they didn't achieve enough speed to reach orbital velocity. So this is 2008, and so we were heading into the recession, and we had 1 rocket left. Unfortunately, in late 2008, that 4th launch did work, and we made it to orbit. And then we won a NASA contract after that, and so fortunately things worked out. But if that 4th launch had not worked, then SpaceX wouldn't be around. So it was a very close call. In fact, when I started, I thought, okay, I've got enough money. I think I've got enough money for 3 launches. Unfortunately, it was just enough to make that 4th one. So in parallel, there was Tesla. And the impetus for Tesla was really to create a compelling electric car. And at first I thought there would not really be a need for such a thing, because I don't know if people are aware of this, but GM at the time had created the EV1, or Electric Vehicle 1, and Toyota had done the electric RAV4. It had been primarily as a result of regulations from the zero-emission mandate states, particularly California. So they created these electric vehicles, and I thought, okay, this is great. Well, GM's obviously going to go from the EV1 to the EV2 and the EV3, and everything will be fine. But when California changed its regulations, they actually, GM recalled all the EV1s and then crushed them so that they could never be returned. So it was clear that if a startup company did not create an electric vehicle and show that it's possible to have an electric car that looks good, goes fast, has long range, and that if you created such a thing that people would buy it, then it would be a very long time before the large incumbents did so. And so I felt it was important that we create Tesla for that reason. And Tesla also almost died in 2008. And as you recall, the recession was particularly difficult for car companies. And right as in the summer of 2008, we had to raise a big funding round. But because of the collapse in the financial system, that funding round didn't happen. And we had to piece together the money to keep the company going from myself and existing investors. And we were able to just complete a financing round that was just barely enough to keep the company going. And we closed it on the last hour of the last day that it was possible to do so. It was Christmas Eve, 2008, 6 p.m. And after that, the investors would have they were going on vacation, wouldn't have been possible to bring them back to the table, and we would have run out of money a few days after Christmas. So that was also a close call. So while things are going really well these days, I think it's always important to remember that when you're creating a company, there are very dark times, and it's about getting through those dark times. That's the difference between success and failure. So, of course, now things are actually going pretty well for Tesla. May they stay that way. And also for SpaceX, we've got the Model S, which is in production, and it was like Consumer Reports gave it a 99 out of 100, which is actually the highest score that Consumer Reports has ever given a car of any kind. Was given to the Model S. And then when the federal government did the safety tests, it actually also got the highest safety rating of any car ever, including minivans and SUVs. So for a sedan. And anyway, so that's going pretty well, and we're actually exporting a lot of the cars to Europe currently, and then we'll start exporting to Asia. And it's funny because I was wondering, like, we got these incredibly good rates for shipping goods to China because all these container ships come in full and they go back empty. So it's real cheap to ship things to China. So we'll start doing that in first quarter. And then with SpaceX, we've got a launch coming up, which is our next generation rocket. Because the key thing for rocketry, the key breakthrough that's needed is to create a fully reusable rocket. Because I think what SpaceX has done thus far is evolutionary, but not revolutionary. In order for that to occur, you have to bring the rocket back to the launch pad and be able to relaunch it again. And just like it has to be reusable much in the way that an airplane or a car or any other mode of transport is reusable. So that's kind of the holy grail goal of spaceflight, which we're hoping to make progress towards. But it's very risky. So there's a good chance that the upcoming launch could go wrong. It's currently slated for the end of this month, and hopefully that goes well. It's always a tricky thing with the rocket business because you can't issue a recall or send a software patch or anything. After the rocket lifts off, 9 minutes later, it's either in orbit or it's exploded. So, yeah, it's nervous 9 minutes. All right, so with those introductory remarks, let's just go to Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I think that there's one question lined up. Student Vice President of University of Montana, Zane, somehow magically Zane's going to appear on the screen, ask a question.
Okay.
Thanks. Zane.
Well, in terms of influencing public policy, I'm not sure we've been particularly successful in influencing public policy, but we've been able to go with the flow of what other people are doing to influence public policy, I think. So in the case of electric vehicles, GM was a big proponent of an electric vehicle tax credit to help with the EV1, oh, not the EV1, I mean the Volt, and then Nissan was also a big proponent of that. So that they have a lot more influence than Tesla did, certainly. So, but we were able to kind of go with them in that direction, maybe add a little bit to the influence on that front. And then on the space side, we've been arguing for a greater share of that more of space should be commercial, and I think there's been some success in that direction. Although it's still a very small part of the NASA budget. It's maybe, I think, 7 or 8% of the NASA budget. So it's still fairly small. So I wouldn't say we've been particularly successful in influencing policy, but we have taken note of what general policy directions are happening, and then trying to, go along with those. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'll ask the first question, then we can open it up. You had said something which is very interesting and true. That is every business starting up reaches a point where the clouds are dark.
Yes.
And it's believing yourself and going through with the Tesla and also with the SpaceX. A couple of times you almost lost it. Most companies all over the country, and also clear in our state, will face issues like that. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how you dealt with those dark moments?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that's pretty key to succeeding.
Absolutely. I think so when you create a company, I mean, if you think, well, what is a company really? A company is a group of people gathered together to create a product or service, and that's really all a company is. And so you have to really believe in what you're creating, and that it's and know in your heart and mind that this is something that matters, and that the world ought to have. And I think it's important to investors to show that you're all in. And I think, for example, with Tesla, the fact that I invested all the money I had, literally I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent in 2008. The fact that I was all in, I think, made a huge difference to investors, to convince them to invest in Tesla at the same time that say GM and Chrysler were going bankrupt. Yeah, I think you have to show that you really care. Like it's like that you've got skin in the game, and that you've given it everything that you've got, and then the other people at the company will follow suit, as will investors. I think that's really important. Yeah, I did that at both SpaceX and Tesla. I think that's really fundamental. And then when you hire people, or really what you're trying to, when you hire people, that just means you're convincing people to join you in the endeavor. You should hire people that are also passionate about what you're doing. So it's not just that they're not just there for the salary. they really need to care about what they're doing, and then they will stay during the dark times.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Elon. While we're waiting for the next question, I just seen your 5 sons in the front row reminds me. When I went to see your dad about 5 or 6, 7 months ago, I saw your photographs on the wall. Elon has 5 boys, 3 triplets and 2 twins. And I want you to know your dad is really proud of all of you, and talked about you on his wall there. Okay, first question. Yes.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that the reason it's important to develop sustainable energy production and consumption is that even if one ignores the environmental consequences and says, okay, well, it's simply a scarce resource. Well, unless we move towards something that is sustainable, that will be there in the long term, then leaving aside any questions of environmental impact, we'll face economic collapse if we run out of fuel to burn and put in vehicles. So my initial interest in sustainable energy production and consumption was actually not driven from an environmental standpoint, although I do think there are environmental consequences, but rather from the importance of the continuance of human civilization, which we would face a disaster if we did not find some alternate means to power society and travel. Although the scarcity issue will only become really serious maybe towards the end of the century, because of the enormous industrial base of power generation and transport, it will take decades to transform that to a sustainable system. So we must take action now in order to avoid a calamity towards the end of the century. I think sustainable production and consumption of energy is the most important terrestrial problem that we face in the 21st century.
Yes, right here.
Well, the overarching goal of SpaceX is to develop technologies that will enable the establishment of a permanent city on Mars, a self-sustaining base on Mars. And we'll try to get as far in that direction as possible, because I think the future of humanity is fundamentally different if we are a spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species compared to one where we are not. And I think both for defensive reasons, essentially to have life insurance for life itself on another planet, and for, frankly, the adventure of it, I think we ought to do that sort of thing. And I actually personally am sort of more motivated by the fact that it would just be the greatest adventure.
And many of us would like to join you. Well, I realized I was at Hannah Card. I should have been addressing people, the questioners at the microphones. That's why they lined up over there. Okay, yes, over there.
Mr. Musk, welcome to Montana. And I have to tell you that you've been one of my great heroes ever since Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear fell in love with an electric car. So thank you very much for that. My question for you is, how do you balance your capacity for risk, your risk tolerance, against your desire to continue to innovate? How do you manage to weigh the two? Because with Tesla, you went all in.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that risk with yourself, knowing that this last project could very well be, the end, versus your desire to keep innovating with the Hyperloop or whatever innovations you have down the pike?
Sure. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that I was certainly facing the loss of all assets. I mean, technically, I would have been negative because I would have been owing people money. But I figured I could always make enough to, or at least borrow enough to pay the rent and buy food and that kind of thing. So I didn't think we would starve or lack for shelter. Although it would have been sad to not to have lost all the assets gained from prior companies. But really, the toughest decision was not whether to invest the money into Tesla, it was really that I had Tesla and SpaceX, and the tough decision was if I split the money between the two companies, then it's possible that both may still have died. And so I had to decide, would I dedicate funds to just one company and let the other one die for sure, or split the funds between the two companies? And that was the really difficult decision.
Okay. One couple more questions. Keep them very short, please. And we'll have short answers.
Yeah, Dustin DeYoung, Montana Department of Commerce. Thank you for your time, Mr. Musk. My question relates to EVs and electrical storage on the grid, and what your thoughts are on that, and what your company is doing to move that forward.
Sure. I do think that we'll need to pair solar power with grid storage, with battery storage. And I don't think actually using the car is going to be the ideal solution, because people usually want to use their car and their house. So I think, but this is often suggested, and it is true that the car has a big battery, and so one could use it perhaps in an emergency. But I think what we'll need to do is have a moderate amount of stationary pack storage combined with solar, and then an electric car. And I think that works.
Okay. Over here. Yes. Short.
Thank you for your presentation today. And my question to you really is, as a young man who's out there searching for himself, and as many in my generation are, we have jobs, not really careers, and we're searching, we're continuously facing unemployment. How do we convert the ideology of space, future, and energy, and how do we personalize it so that we ourselves can convert this energy into something meaningful? How do we get involved?
Okay. Well, I think you could either work at a company in those arenas, or say, okay, what's some important piece of the puzzle in rockets or cars or something, and then put together a group of people and figure out how to make that piece of the puzzle super good. And that's I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Over here.
Good morning, Matt Sargent from Headframe Spirits here in Butte. I'm wondering how a rural state like Montana can increase its technology economy. You know, what lessons have you learned from Silicon Valley that could apply here in small town America?
Well, I mean, the most important thing is people. So you need to gather together a group of engineers, essentially, to create technology. And that's what engineers do. They create technology. But you have to have a critical mass of such people that's equal to the task that you attempt to complete. So that's the most important thing, a critical mass of people.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hey, Max, Elon. Right on, John Innovations. Elon, it's a pleasure to talk to you here. You're like myself here, except you with innovation, but you have more money. So,
I started out with zero, though.
Yes, I'm at that point, right at this point. I have innovations that could actually move SpaceX, the tunnel, even Tesla car. What would be the easiest way to be in contact with you to bring these ideas forward?
Well, you can send an email to Elon Musk Office at SpaceX.com if you'd like. That's
okay.
All right.
And can I do have a sheet right here with my info. If I could leave it with somebody that you would.
All right.
Thank you very much.
We'll get it to him. Okay. Yes.
Hello, my name is Jackson. I'm a Sentinel High Schooler from Missoula, Montana. Thank you for coming. And I want to know, what is the one thing that has surprised you about your life?
Oh, one thing. Wow. Well, I'm surprised by the whole thing, honestly. I certainly didn't expect to be for any of these things to happen, honestly. Yeah. I just knew I knew I wanted to be involved in technology. In fact, the only reason I started a company back in '95, an internet company, was because I couldn't get it. There were only a few internet companies, and I couldn't get a job at any of them. I tried to get a job at Netscape and sent my resume in and tried hanging out in the lobby, but I was too shy to talk to anyone. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll have to start a company because I can't get a job anywhere. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name's Toby McAdam. I have a company called Rising Sun Health. I deal with government regulations. What do you think of them? I'm actually dealing with the FDA, and after talking to Senator Baucus, I've had 15 attorneys, and they spent $3.5 million. We're in the middle of a consent decree.
Closer to the
Sorry, I
mic,
can't
please.
hear the question.
They have 15 attorneys. After I've talked to Senator Baucus and Senator Tester, we ended up with 15 attorneys on the FDA, and they've signed a consent decree. But government regulation, what do you think of those? Are they too strict? Because with the FDA, they haven't had a I guess since 1995, but they keep changing the rules. And right now, in the last 3 years, more fatalities have been in the previous 50.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably are getting a bit too regulated, you know. So.
How would you recommend going about it? Because I've tried Senator Baucus and Senator Tester, and I just keep getting attorneys, and I actually had to file papers against the FDA myself.
Right. Well, I don't know. I think generally with laws and regulations, I think they should all come with some sort of a sunset clause, you know, because otherwise they have infinite life.
Right. Do you think they should set standards where all companies follow?
Well, I do think that there ought to be standards bodies. I'm not completely libertarian in the sense of like I don't think there should be regulations at all. I just think that the natural bias of regulations is to last forever unless they are actively. You have to actively delete a regulation or a law. The way things are set up in most laws. Some laws have sunset provisions. And the problem with that is you get vested interests who like that law, and there's an inertia around it. And so over time, the body of law and regulations grows and grows and grows. It is something that I think is not ultimately good for society. So, in fact, I think it would generally be a good idea to have it such that it's hard to establish a rule and easy to remove one.
What you're saying is the rules should be consistently used to all companies.
Well, sure, of course, absolutely. That's fair.
Senator Baucus? That's
I hear
the
you.
point. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Couple more, very quick. We're already over time.
And there's a big sign here that says the end, by the way.
It's just
Craig Sundberg.
It's not the end.
You know, I'm just always been interested in.
Go ahead, right here.
I've just always been interested in space travel. I know one of the problems where they've had was the lack of gravity and the effects of that on the human body. I was wondering how your company has made progress in that area so that colonization of Mars at some point can be possible.
Sure. Well, the zero gravity on the way to Mars is not too much of a problem because people have actually shown that they can live for over a year in zero gravity, your bones do get a little thinner, but they come back and they're walking around, they're doing fine. So I think the zero gravity just spending 3 to 6 months in zero gravity is not a problem, and then one can deal with the solar radiation, solar storms essentially, by having a column of water between you and the sun. So on your spaceship, you orient the spaceship so that there's a column of water between you and the sun. That'll take care of the solar storms.
Thank you.
We're going to have to wrap up here. I'm really very sorry.
It's the end.
It's Elon will tell you. This sign, the end's been up for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, true.
Well, thank you.